welcome to another edition of MedGeek TV, the geekiest place on earth. Today is a super special day. I'm super excited to bring this woman on my show. So Dr. Nasha Winters, I have been a raving fan for 20 plus years. She is a brilliant, beyond brilliant, naturopathic physician, and her specialty is integrative oncology. And she wrote a fabulous book that we're going to talk about. It's called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. And it's not just about cancer, it's about the metabolic approach to health, and we'll get into that in detail. But she is one of those people that you just want to know. And so I am so grateful that she is here today. And I have interviewed Nasha a few times, I'll be honest, but this time is so exciting because I feel like she is on the brink of what she has been trying to accomplish for decades. And she has not only helped thousands of people and now millions of people, but her reach of what she's going to do with this new clinic that she's putting together, which is so exciting, and her book and training physicians is phenomenal. So you do not want to miss this interview. So I would say pull up a chair, get a pad of paper, and enjoy. You are in for a treat.
Next level. Next level.
So we are recording. Hi, Nasha. How
Hi,
are you?
I'm so good. Good to see you.
Oh, it's so good to see you. I am so excited to catch up with you and see what's going on in your life right now. I want to say over and over again, I recommend this to all my clients and all my friends. It's this beautiful book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, that Dr. Nasha wrote. And the reason I love it, and there's so many reasons I love it, but it has all the things that I'm super excited about. So you talk about the microbiome, you talk about epigenetics and nutrigenomics, diet and nutrition and herbs and detoxification. The list goes on. And so I feel like this book is not just about cancer treatment, but about whole metabolic health. And I love that the way you approach cancer, it's, these are the cells of our body. And you even dedicate this book to cancer as it's a teacher for you, right? And that's so beautiful. And so I wanted to ask you to share with our listeners, what does it mean, the metabolic approach to cancer?
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate that very sweet intro. And I really love that you really highlight to folks that even though cancer is in the title, this book is really written for anybody and everybody. And it's the culmination of 25 plus years of my own journey of trying to figure out, as one of my patients calls it, save your ass university, and like putting it all together. And then I was blessed enough to have my co-author, Jess Higgins Kelly. She worked with me in my clinic for a period of time, so she got to see it in action. She also was came and did some facilitating of our retreats for many years. So she got to also be in the deep immersion, intimate connections of it all as well. And then she herself is an amazing writer and an amazing nutritionist. So it was a really lovely connection and evolution of me wanting to get this book out for so long, but frankly needing the help to make it happen. So I really want to give a big shout out to her contribution to all of this, of kind of like bringing my words and my experience to life and really helping pull it all together in a really beautiful way. So we're excited. We have another baby book coming out, which we'll talk about in the next section of our talk today. But that being said, the metabolic approach to health, to life, to prevention, to cancer, to chronic illness, however we want to phrase this, is about taking a very natural process within each and every one of our cells that has gotten really off track in the last 100, 150 years, which is this concept of the energy fuel source, the preferential energy that our body uses to drive this vehicle down the road. Okay, so I always kind of give a little bit of the concept that we're really built to be hybrid engines. We're just like human Prius. Okay, and with that being said, we were from the beginning of time never meant to sort of eat from sunrise to sundown and everything in between. We were to have moments of feast and famine. We did not have the types of chemical exposures or the farming and agricultural practices that we have today. We went from 5 pounds of sugar per person per year in 1850 to over 175 pounds of sugar per person per year today. These are the big changes that happened in a short period of time, and that changed our metabolic motors. And when I talk about metabolic, to get really specific down into each and every one of our cells, we have these little organelles within each cell called the mitochondria. Now, many of you recall from probably grade school biology, the mighty mitochondria. And we were just sort of taught these little creatures were like the factory of energy in our body, right?
Yes.
Now,
yes.
That's part of the equation of what mitochondria are important for, very important for actually, because you can't function without energy within your body. Right? And our body will absolutely take and use up whatever we throw at it and turn it into energy. It's just sort of, like it'll just gobble it up. It's sort of like goats eating your compost, but also the garbage and your t-shirt. Like whatever they have access to, they will eat. That is what the mitochondria does as well. So it's completely reliant on what we feed it. Our thoughts, our food, water, our air, what's in our soil, all of those things go through and filter through the mitochondria to help produce energy. And when we're giving it the right balance of nutrients from those sources I just talked about, those little factories are very efficient and effective and very vital and actually make more little factories. But when we start to throw a lot of garbage into the mix, they become a little depleted. They become a little lazy. They become a little congested and inefficient, and they make less energy. And then over time, they die off. And we don't have as many of those factories as are needed. And as we all naturally age, we make less and less of those factories over time, but we're aging ourselves very quickly at a very young age now in a way that we haven't ever seen in human evolution. So when I'm talking about metabolic approach to health and wellness, it's about how can we optimize the fuel source that we're feeding those little powerhouses, and how can we change those outcomes? And that's part of the equation, but we'll dive into a little bit more here in a moment.
I love that explanation. Thank you, honey. And one thing is I wanted to interview you again and again and again is because I see you as, the ultimate health hero, because you, as all of us, we have health crises that we have to overcome. Right? And your dance has been with cancer itself. And so can you take us down that road a little bit of when you were first diagnosed and how you faced that challenge?
Yeah. And, writing this book, it was sort of a reflection on where it all began for me, which was in many ways in vitro, right? Coming into being a body that came into existence, that just sort of planted my seed after a loss of a child previous to me. So the fear and the loss of the container known as my mother definitely had an effect on the way I was gestated, how I was sort of brewed in there, because I'm sure when you've had such a significant loss that you're going to be terrified of experiencing that again. So it's hard to separate that out. So, I tell that part of the story so that people recognize we come into this world with not just our own, but with the people that came before us. In fact, the study of epigenetics today shows that we are impacted by even upwards of 4 generations above us and their experience of trauma and loss and war and famine, which makes our metabolic machinery behave a little bit differently in subsequent generations. So I had that. I had an environment of being raised in an environment of a lot of stressors. In fact, one of the chapters in our book on the mental emotional side goes into detail about a concept known as the ACE score, adverse childhood events. And so with an ACE score, for every yes on that 10 question, you have a 10 to 20% increased risk of chronic illness and cancer and mental illness in your adulthood. So there's 10 questions about exposures you would have had before the age of 18. And when we go through, anybody can go online and look up the ACE score questionnaire and download that and answer that for themselves. But basically, just to give a little transparency as well, I had a yes on all 10 of those things before I was 18 years old. That also set a terrain. I was super sick as a kid. I had major digestive issues. I was allergic to everything. It was funny that we never thought it would be a good idea to put me on breast milk. My mom didn't have the milk resources, but we also at a time in the 70s, breast milk, breastfeeding wasn't a thing. We weren't doing breast banks. We weren't doing, breast doulas. We weren't doing those types of things. So that was this place where they threw me immediately on to the one that I could tolerate, which was soy milk. That really set the pace for a lot of my other health issues, which ended up menstruating at 9 years old, all kinds of other GI issues, endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, but all these patterns well before I was even a teenager had taken root. So I had a very sick terrain from the start, okay? I give that background because every single patient I see with cancer will say to me, but I was healthy until I got cancer. All right. Mm-hmm. I will tell you in my psychology that at being told you have cancer at 19 or almost 20 at that time, by the time they actually had the official diagnosis, I was moving through my 19th year into my 20th year. I was still shocked because I still thought I had been healthy all of those years, because we just start to learn to just sort of tolerate the intolerable within ourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And so by the time the actual diagnosis came to me, I was actually at a place in my life where I wasn't certain if I wanted to be here anymore. And to me, cancer was the ignition, it was like the key in the ignition to wake things up and to really help me root in to decide, I need to be here. This is what I want to do. This is what I came here to do. So now, in retrospect, looking back, I recognized I had created quite a fertile soil for chronic illness and disease, and in particular cancer. And my life's work now is to help other people illuminate into the darkness and into the garden of themselves to recognize this has been a long time coming. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you go to bed without cancer and wake up the next morning with it. It takes years, if not decades, to come to fruition. So that is what my living experience has been, is to help people understand the why and then understand how to change that. So it's very much about helping people understand their entire journey and to recognize it's not linear, okay? And that we can at any time change the trajectory.
Yes. And I remember when I first spoke with you about your cancer journey, how you talked about the emotional part, like actually fasting from relationships, not just fasting from food, right? And it's all so intertwined, which is so beautiful. And you also mentioned that at any given time, we all have cancer cells in our body. They're just part of us.
Exactly. And so if we remember that it's not the enemy, that it's not something outside of us that invades us. It's actually something that is us, and it's trying to be a messenger, and it is trying to ignite or shine light in a part of ourselves that we are unaware of. And so we have spent, since the war declared on cancer, since 1971, looking at this as the enemy that must be destroyed. And we have the run for the cure and the battle cries and the whole sort of, even the way we have conceptualized cancer in our modern paradigm today is one of we must attack and kill the invader ideology. And yet it's not a surprise to me that we haven't made that much change in the outcomes of cancer diagnoses and survival rates in over 50 years, simply because we are attacking the very core of what this disease is. We are attacking ourselves. We are literally disconnecting from ourselves even further in most situations with a cancer diagnosis or any chronic illness for that matter. And ironically, where we started this conversation about the metabolic piece of all of this is the type of tools we use today to treat a standard of care approach to cancer actually makes that metabolic process even worse. Okay, this is not to discredit or to negate Western medicine at all. Okay, this is to say that we can do better and we can do things in addition to. So even if we choose to bring on cytotoxic reducing treatments such as chemotherapy, radiation, targeted therapies, surgery, we need to do so with a little more finesse and with a little more concept of knowing how to sort of rebuild while removing. You know, that same concept where now in Western medicine, we just sort of like napalm it all down and hope and pray something's left behind at the end. And hope and pray that if you are lucky enough to have a remission by doing just standard of care, that you won't become the 70% of people that will have a recurrence that is often much more aggressive and much more difficult to push back. So my hope in the work that I've learned for myself and thousands of others is that you can have an elegant balance of both, that we can restore the organism back to a place of optimal health while removing the burden that's there. And that burden only showed up because we allowed it to on a different level. It's not that it was our fault, but things accumulate over time in our bucket, if you will, in our metabolic bucket.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You talk a lot in the book about, and I know you're a big proponent of the ketogenic diet and, you know, being keto adapted. Can you tell me a little bit of what is the ketogenic diet?
Sure. So going back to that concept of us being a hybrid engine, specifically the fuel sources that our cells will preferentially use to help our container keep moving is sugar from carbohydrates or fat from quality fat. Okay. And if we have excess protein, that can also convert into sugar, into a concept called gluconeogenesis. So our food and all the information we take in is exactly as I said, fuel sources for the mitochondria, for the metabolic state. So one of the things up until we started to process sugar and flour in the 1850s is that we were all naturally going into ketosis just from finishing dinner and breaking your fast 13, 14 hours later for breakfast, you'd be in a low-grade state of ketosis. We were all metabolically flexible enough at that time so that if there were times of, you know, a poor harvest year, for instance, or a terrible flood took out your crop, or some disease took away your livestock, or it was a poor year of around, you know, like drought or whatnot, that you didn't have access to good hunting, things like that, we had to be able to go for days on end without food. And we needed to have our ability to think clearly to keep ourselves alive in order to search for that next meal. And there's also just different times naturally in human evolution where we have our seasons, where there are certain times of the year where food is abundant, and there are times of the year where food is very deficient. And you have to be able to switch biochemically and physiologically into a state that frankly keeps you alive until you can get to that next feast. But today we live in a feast mode. We've got a brick on the accelerator pedal of carbohydrate, and we are driving in that mode. And our bodies have forgotten, our psychology has forgotten, and our culture has forgotten that being hungry is not bad, is not dangerous, and that going past a certain amount of time without food actually switches us into that hybrid engine where we are actually very clear, very present, very efficient in our way of thinking and feeling and finding our next food source. And so that state, when you have burned off that excess glucose, moves you into a fat burning state, which releases these little bodies called ketone bodies. And these are the guys that are, interestingly enough, our mitochondria will use more effectively and efficiently and actually produce more ATP, more final product energy at the end of the day. It's like the glucose is sort of just the fast fix. It's like, yeah, well, we can all make do here. But when we actually move into fat burning, it becomes a transformational fix that actually creates more energy and more sustained energy in the body as a whole. And so that's the place where historically we all naturally got into that state of being, but we're so far from that natural rhythm of ourselves that we now have to kind of force it again. Okay. And that might be with fasting. Okay. That might be with caloric restriction. That might be with even exogenous ketone supplementation in very rare situations where warranted. And it might be eating a very preferentially high percentage of your diet as quality fat intake and extremely low carbohydrate intake. There's multiple ways to kind of reset that metabolic engine. And ketones, ketone bodies, ketone diet, ketogenic diet are a really powerful way to do just that. And what we have found we started using this diet in the 1920s as a means of treating severe childhood epilepsy. And it lost favor when the pharmaceutical industry put out a medication in the 1940s that basically it was much easier for people to pop a pill versus continue a way of eating, a way of life. And ironically, over all the years, the studies still show that the diet has always still worked better than the pill ever did. And so that's it's again, I think our culture has sort of set us up for failure in the realms of eating this way as well, because we have a lot of industries driving this, a lot of belief systems, a lot of self-limiting belief systems around you don't want to feel hunger. You should never go hungry. You should eat something every 2 to 3 hours. That is like a place of panic. And when we're in that place of panic, our bodies can't heal other things. It's putting all the energy into basically finding and feeding, and then digesting. And so we don't have the break we need to take out the garbage, which is a concept called autophagy or autophagy, depending tomato. And so we don't take out the garbage anymore. We just accumulate, which, given now that about 70% of the American population is morbidly obese, you can visually see that we've accumulated a lot. And for those of us who are walking around looking like normal body types, we can also have these lovely sort of fat blobs around our organs. So we call those skinny fat people. But you can't guess anymore. You can't just look at someone and guess their metabolic flexibility. You can't guess their health. You just can't. So today we have to really teach people how to test, assess, and address their own terrain, and to practice a state of becoming a hybrid engine again. And it may be worthwhile to help them get into a state of ketosis to get to that optimal place.
I love that you brought up that, the history of this, because this is all ancestral medicine, right? Like the detoxification protocols and all of that, and dietary and fasting. And, knowing that the ketogenic diet was historically used with great benefit, are there more studies coming up or in your field? Are people utilizing this for cancer therapy, or have you noticed anything like that?
Excellent question. It's amazing because now a couple times a year there are multiple conferences worldwide. One is called Keto Con, which is sort of like the Comic-Con world of bringing all sort of the ketogenic enthusiasts together. At first, it was sort of like a kind of a CrossFit haven, but now it's become in the last several years much more based in scientific evidence, much more of both the clinicians and the researchers coming to present their data, as well as it being an incredible place to highlight new information, new products, new ways of testing, new ways of sort of biohacking, as well as new foods that are becoming available to this lifestyle. Okay, so there's that side. Then there's a bunch of conferences like Low Carb USA, which they have all over the United States. They've got the big one twice a year, one in Florida, one in San Diego. I'll be presenting the one in San Diego in July. But they have those as well as the Universe, Low Carb Universe. So they are having these ongoing kind of conversations of bringing together the best of the minds of the clinical folks working at the bedside, as well as the folks working at the bench, the researchers. All right, so we're all coming together. And then also what's really come out, this will be the 4th year coming up here in January 2020, is the Metabolic Health Summit, which is very much about all of the research and all of the different sort of avenues in which a ketogenic diet or ketones or ketone bodies can treat chronic illness. So for instance, at the Metabolic Conference, you'll have an entire arm on just obesity. You'll have an entire arm just on diabetes, an entire arm just on neurological disorders that might include Alzheimer's, but also autism, ADD, mental emotional issues, and also things like cancer and cardiovascular disease, and even in like chronic injury, or especially things like chronic brain injury. So it's really cool to see that the research is starting to explode all over the place. And that an example is that right now when you do a search engines and you see what are the most sought after topics, the top 3 right now are intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, and cannabis. Right? And that's been the
right there.
Right? All of them. And it's interesting because an interesting side note on cannabis, which I think Steve will be talking to you about in the next discussion, is that if you have a high omega-6 ratio, which is the ratio of fatty acids that are from our standard American diet and from a crappy way of eating and from vegan, vegetarian diets predominantly, and from eating poorly processed foods, then you have also what's, too high omega-6s and too low of omega-3s. Guess what? Your endocannabinoid system is off the grid when that happens. So you have to even have a proper functioning omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, good quality fats to tone your own internal endocannabinoid system. And if you're going to use that plant medicine, to have a good outcome or a good benefit from using that medicine. Because if you're just sitting around eating Wendy's and smoking a doobie, you are adding insult to injury. In fact, that's where we end up with all the psychoses landing in the ER. So
Right.
that's a fun little side note there, but it is interesting to me for the last several years. Those are the topics of interest worldwide in the highest sought out information. And it's also looking that the ketogenic lifestyle and world of medicine, research, treatment, products, etc., is a $3 trillion industry, is what they're anticipating by the end of 2020. So it's here to stay, guys, because money will also change the industry. So those are some interesting things to consider. But specifically, when you ask about for cancer, there are currently in the United States alone 21 clinical trials on ketogenic diets for cancer. That's just happening right now. That doesn't even count what's been down the pipeline already, and it doesn't count what's happening worldwide. That's just what's going on currently in the United States, or 21 research trials. And then what's really cool are people like Dr. Adrienne Scheck, who is a brilliant brain cancer researcher she was at Barrows Neurological. She's now with the Phoenix Children's Hospital. But she's been able to show, along with other researchers, that ketone bodies impact directly all 10 hallmarks of cancer. And we talk about the 10 hallmarks of cancer in our book, but they're basically how a cancer cell behaves differently from a healthy cell. And a lot of people think that a ketogenic diet is just simply going to starve the glucose that feeds the cancer, but it's far more elegant and sophisticated than that. So I would look up, just even Google 10 hallmarks of cancer to see that, wow, ketone bodies address every one of those. We do not have a pharmaceutical on the planet that addresses all 10 at once. And I can't even think of one that might address more than 2 or 3 at a time. So it's pretty profound.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And I know you talk in the book too about mistletoe therapy. Is there a place where, you don't have to go into huge detail, but is there a place where people could learn more about mistletoe that you
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, of course, in the book, there's a little bit of information. And then also, I'm on a medical board. I'm on an advisory board with a company or organization called BelieveBig.org. And this is based on a young woman's incredible story of overcoming a terminal, very genetic driven colorectal cancer at a very young age with young children, that was basically given no chance. And mistletoe therapy was sort of recommended to her by several people in her world that she brought on board, and she just hit her 11th year of remission. And thanks to her experience, she was able to convince her team at Johns Hopkins, including her, at that time, primary oncologist, who's now the head of solid tumor oncology at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So these are, very notable physicians, clinicians as well, that are also interested in the research, that were willing to help her and her organization basically spearhead and fund a clinical trial on mistletoe at Johns Hopkins. It's ironic in that there's well over 2,500 established clinical trials worldwide on this. In fact, if you're a cancer patient in Europe, especially in Germany, Austria, France, Switzerland, you have about an 85% of the time you will use mistletoe at some point of your cancer journey. I have a really good colleague, Dr. Gelman, who's the head of pediatric oncology at the largest hospital in São Paulo, Brazil, who uses mistletoe with all of his pediatric oncology patients. And then in Southeast Asia and India now has mistletoe as part of the medical healthcare system. It is part of the free care for the patients there. It's like as part of the medical system. And they're moving to make that happen in other parts of Southeast Asia as well. So it's something that's actually been around for well over 100 years at this point, but it's an extract from a semi-parasitic plant that grows in trees and has shown these lectins, these particular polysaccharides in its extraction that has some really interesting anti-cancer properties, but also lowers angiogenesis, lowers inflammation, increases a sense of well-being, which we now believe to be that it raises natural endorphin levels as well as upregulates our endocannabinoid system. Okay, so these are some very powerful aspects of a medicine that's been around. And in the field of oncology today, the most fast growing and most studied and the most money being funneled into the research area is on immunotherapies. So a lot of people hear about things like checkpoint inhibitors, Keytruda, Opdivo, CTLA-4 inhibitors. These are today's modern medicines of immunotherapies, and yet we have had a very potent immunotherapy around for over 100 years that has incredibly safe profile, very low cost, and is a very powerful way to enhance all outcomes and to enhance all therapies for patients undergoing cancer treatment.
That is amazing. And you know, your book is so beautifully written, the way it's laid out with the Train 10. It's so easy to read. Are you then writing more books coming up?
So Jess and I, you know, one of the things we did, what we built upon was, so this book was birthed out of an experience of over 250 patients that Steve and I facilitated through cancer retreats. All right. And we would sort of give them, as they would say, it was like sipping water out of a fire hydrant after a 4-day immersion with us. And they're like, you have got to write this stuff down into a book. That's why it was great to us to be like, Jess, you could help me take all of that information and organize it in a beautiful fashion and really help me bring it to life. Okay. But basically what we started to help people understand is that, you know, there is no one cause or one cure for cancer. Each of us, you could take 10 women of the same age, the same demographic, with the same diagnosis of breast cancer, and realize that they all have 10 different reasons of why they have that diagnosis and 10 different ways in which would be the most appropriate way to treat it. And so part of that is the exploration of these 10 main patterns that I have found that affected me, as well as thousands and thousands of other patients I've had the pleasure of working with for over a quarter century, where we test, assess, and address the 10 items that sort of fill in that metabolic mitochondrial bucket. So that's things you mentioned earlier, like our epigenetics. So what was passed down before us that came through us. We might have been dealt that hand of cards, but we play them as we choose, right? And then we have things like the dysglycemia. I mentioned how sugar has sort of taken over and put the gas pedal on sugar burning versus fat burning. That's that dysglycemia when 1 in 3 Americans are expected to have diabetes by 2020. It's just around the corner, folks. Okay, I think it's actually higher than that because that means already diagnosable diabetes, not pre-diabetes, which basically means within 4 to 5 years, you too will join the club, diabetes club, which is not a club you want to join. Number 3, toxicant exposures, you guys. 60,000 plus chemicals that we've had introduced to the world since the 1960s, of which less than 200 have been properly tested. Every day we're starting to realize, oops, that was probably a bad idea. And we're starting to also realize the accumulative effect, not just one of them by themselves as a problem, but when you put them all in a soup together, that's when it's a problem. Microbiome, you mentioned, inflammation, immune system, angiogenesis, circulation, also things like our stress hormone response and our circadian rhythms, our hormone balance, and how we metabolize the hormones we're exposed to, as well as our mental emotional health. Those 10 pieces need to be looked at very much in depth. And at the beginning of our book, we have a 10-part, 10 questions to each part questionnaire. So patients can start there, do their own sort of audit, and see what the priority may be. It might be 1, it might be 10. Most of us have 2 or 3 that are sort of the priority. And the encouraging news is that no matter where you start, you're going to impact the whole, right? So that's what, just in thinking of that sort of bucket metaphor, when we start to look inside the bucket and realize what's swimming around in there, we can start to change it. And even if you have all 10 of your terrain 10 issues are a hot mess, anywhere you start, it's going to start to sort of purify what goes into that bucket and change the outcomes.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And so are you then going to start some programs with educating practitioners? Is that kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, for many years I had a private clinical practice that it was very, very successful, very busy. I sold that in 2014 and moved into, at that time I was just going to be kind of consulting with patients. I actually took a break from seeing patients for 2 years so I could study more and get out there and travel to clinics all over the world that were having really different outcomes of cancer diagnoses and outcomes of survival rates and different tools that we're just not exposed to here in the United States. So during that time, I had a couple of other colleagues that I'd worked closely with and really trained them in my methodology and in the way I think about and approach each and every unique individual with a diagnosis of cancer. And so I had them helping me out in the interim of that while I kind of went out and explored and dug deeper into the world around me. And I opened up my practice for a short period of time, so I wanted to keep myself fresh with the information and how to still apply it. But also, ironically, patients, when they started to learn about me and my history, I didn't share my history when I was in private practice because it was very different. When you're in a private practice, you have a lot more kind of walls around you of what you can say and do with your patients. You have to follow lots of standard of care procedures. So I did not want people to say, well, I'm going to do what she did and I'll be okay. So I kept my story very private to myself of what I did or didn't do with regards to my own cancer diagnosis. But when I moved into the consulting world, one of the things that I was sort of coached to do is tell my story, really get it out there. I'll tell you, that was terrifying. It's still terrifying. It always still throws me off. I don't really like to talk about it because I don't associate myself as a cancer patient, okay? I just see myself as being on a continuum of a health and vitality continuum, okay? And so, it's nonlinear, as I said earlier. So that is just my paradigm of thinking. But when I got out there into a year of opening up my practice and saying, hey, I'll see a few folks, I thought I'd see a couple a month. It was like the door got kicked down, the floodgates opened, and within an 8-month period of time, I saw over 460 new clients. And that were on my bucket, okay? My mitochondria took a beating. I love this work, but I realized it was not scalable or sustainable at the way I was doing it. And so from that, I realized I had to really train the trainers. I had to really switch because I could give these patients these amazing assessments. We did all the testing, we did the assessment, we did the addressing, we told them exactly what they needed to do next. Take this to your healthcare provider and have them run with it. The bottleneck was the healthcare provider. The patients are savvy. Like I said, the Save Your Ass University, they're out there and they're like, I got it. I know what I need to do. I just need your help doing it. No one was out there to heed the call. So that's where I had to back up and change gears. And now, right now, I'm working on specifically just one-on-one consults with doctors to help them know how to assess, address, and test their own patients. And my hope and my experience so far is that each and every time I do one of these consultations, I use that as an opportunity to educate them to know how to help a multitude of patients in their practice. So they might see this one person, but it's going to be information that helps hopefully dozens. That's been the feedback I've gotten so far. And I will tell you this, in opening up the doors to that since the beginning of 2019, I'm already almost maxing out that. So what that has showed me is, yet again, our scalability is the key. How can I take this information and package it in a way to really teach the methodology? So I am starting a very intimate sort of internship, mentorship with a handful of very select doctors that I have done some client interactions with and some consulting for that I know already resonate with this, get it, have an affinity for thinking in this paradigm, and will get them really trained and endorsed so that people know that they exist and can go to see them. So that scalability is working its way and hopefully will be up and running by the late fall to get up. I was going to start with 10, but I have such a huge waiting list of doctors interested in doing this training. I might exceed that in the first go, but I'm hoping to offer that sort of 4-month intensive twice a year. That is now segueing into the next state of things, is that right now you have to patchwork together all of this information. You have to go here to run this test. Oh, but this doctor won't order that test. So you have to go over here to run this test. Oh, but that, so you have to go to 9 different places to get your labs run. Then you have to find the nutritionist. Then you have to find the open-minded surgeon or the open-minded integrative oncologist. I mean, right now it's like hodgepodge. It's like a quilt that we're trying to patchwork together with a little bit of bubblegum and duct tape. There is not a place on the planet where everything that I've learned and everything that I've seen can be incredibly impactful for patients under one roof. And my patients who can access the majority of these items, they have to piecemeal it together and pay for it dearly, okay, and have enough resource and support at home to help them do this is not for the faint of heart, and it is not made available for everybody. So the next step of this is to create, which I have partnered with an amazing core group of individuals that are very in alignment with my work, with my own personal journey, as well as my vision, to have a private hospital research institute where all of this will be done under the guise of a bench to the bedside to the bench and a bench to the bedside research institution, data driven, metric collected, where we can actually show very much in real time and with artificial intelligence, as well as good data and lots of testing from tissue to blood biopsies to laboratory assessments to environmental exposures and ACE scores, everything under one roof, including all the different providers and all the different testing and all the different diagnostic equipment and all the different modalities, everything from standard of care treatments but done differently. So for instance, we will be offering chemotherapy, but it'll be metronomic, fractionated, and it will be geared precisely to the patient based on their tumor profile. Not just, oh, you got breast cancer, this is the cocktail you get, and move on. Get on the assembly line and move through. That goes away. We're in the era of precision medicine, and we need to take advantage of it. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And so this facility, we hope, will be up and running within the next 3 years. And we're just now in the phase of gathering the funds to make it happen. The interest is there. The experts are there. The knowledge is there. The testing is there. All of that is there. It just needs to be brought under one roof. And I'm very excited that this is frankly my lifelong dream. This is what I came here to do.
Oh, that is so exciting, Nasha. Oh my goodness.
I say it sometimes like, oh my gosh, this is happening. We just made the announcement at the Believe Big annual dinner. And if you go to the believebig.org site, if you kind of scroll down, you'll see a little 1.5 minute video about the vision of where we're hoping to go. There'll be more coming out here in the next few months as well, as we start to meet with potential investors to launch this.
Oh, yay. Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
Oh, so this has been so amazing. Thank you. I always close with 3 questions for my health heroes. And so the question number 1 is, if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Oh gosh, let's see here. So I think what I see a need for the most out there, which I would love to have the superpower, because I have the superpower within me, let's put it that way, but I'd like to be able to impart it on others, which is sort of like the human version of Ganesh, the remover of obstacles. Okay. And that superpower specifically to me would be about removing the obstacles of our own self-doubt and self-limitation and the cloak of fear that will push us to make really poor decisions for ourselves. So I'd like to be the obstacle of, to be the superhero power of removal of the obstacle of cure concept. I think would be a very powerful one to be, because that's where I see folks get hung up, is in their self-limiting belief systems.
Oh, I love it. Okay, the second question, if you could transform anything in global health, whether it's human or planetary, what would it be?
That's super easy. Prevention, prevention, prevention. Prevention is the only cure, period. Okay, and I think that that's the place where we look at the concept of test, assess, address, look inside your bucket. You don't wait until you're sick to look inside the bucket. Constantly evaluating what you're putting on, in, and around you and changing it up before it's a problem.
And I think you might have answered number 3 here, but if you could gift the listener with any advice to support their health, just a little bit of wisdom, what would that be?
I would just want them to remember, and I've said this a lot, but I think it's always worth repeating, is that you are far more powerful than you've been led to believe.
That is so beautiful. Nasha, I love you.
We have many years behind us.
Thank you so much. And I already have the caricature that you're gonna be the cancer ninja. I tell you that.
Oh, I like it. And remove your obstacles to cure.
Oh, sweetie, well, good luck with everything. I know you're gonna rock it. And it's been such an honor to chat with you today. Okay.
Much love.
Bye.
Oh my goodness. Wasn't that awesome? I love Nasha. Her warmth, her knowledge, she's like a walking encyclopedia. You just want to like massage her brain. She's so incredible and she's so lovely. And I really hope you enjoyed this. If you want to follow Nasha, you can go to her Instagram page, Dr. Nasha, Nasha Winters, with an S at the end, Winters, and also on Facebook, the same name, Dr. Nasha Winters. She is phenomenal, and I can't wait to see where she's going now. You can, of course, get her book, which has been translated in multiple languages. It's on Audible. It is so worth it, so well written, and I know there's more books to come. She is making such an impact. She is a true health hero. And speaking of health heroes, if you have a health hero that you would like me to interview or would like me to spotlight on this channel, because we are building this rebel force of phenomenal brainiacs who are making a huge impact on our health, because medicine of the people should be available. All this knowledge should be available, and we want to make a dent in this health crisis that we are experiencing. And so thank you so much for being part of this, and comment below, share this video, because Nasha is one of those lights that is so bright, and I want to share her with the world. So share it with everybody you know, and let's see how we can make a difference in this cancer epidemic and this health epidemic of our country and our world. And I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.